All right, and according to StreamYard, we are now live, Owen.
Yep,
So,
so for me as well.
okay. Well, we were just talking backstage. It's been 2 years that we've been kind of chatting on Discord, and we're just now getting
Yeah,
face to face for a live
yeah,
chat, and it's for Ray Bradbury,
yeah.
which for spooky season, oddly, is quite fitting. How did you get into Ray Bradbury?
I think when I was a teenager, I did read The Illustrated Man, so I liked him then. I was like, oh, that's a good book, and that kind of, though we didn't read it for spooky season, that does connect to what we're reading a bit. But I think it's just getting more into sci-fi fantasy booktube. Not that anyone was talking about Ray Bradbury particularly, but I was like, oh, okay, what classic writers should I be reading that I haven't read much of? And obviously Fahrenheit 451, Martian Chronicles, Something Wicked are very famous. And so I was like, yeah, I'll just read some Ray Bradbury. And I've read.
Oh, I just lost your audio. I think your headset came undone. Did it come unplugged? Yeah. For me, when it comes to Ray Bradbury, I want to be back. But when it comes to Ray Bradbury, I just started reading Ray Bradbury like this last month, and it's been a bit of a wild ride because he's a clear influence on Stephen King, which Stephen King being one of my favorite authors that I am currently reading. I've read around 30-ish books by Stephen King. And so Ray Bradbury, a clear influence on Stephen King, just in the way the prose flows and the way the story elements are told. I'm absolutely loving it. And when Owen gets back, what we're going to be talking about is Something Wicked This Way Comes, The Halloween Tree, and the short story collection, The October Country, which has around 19 short stories in it. And I'm so excited to talk about the October Country because it starts off really, really slow. And then it just won me over in the end. Yes. So I actually just read Fahrenheit 451 this month, actually, because I've read 4 Ray Bradburys this month, and I can't stop reading Ray Bradbury. You got your
Just
audio back.
sorting my settings now. Give me just
it,
one
it
second.
sounded like the jack got pulled a little bit, and then all of a sudden your audio just vanished. So it's good to hear your voice again. I've just been in the background, kind of just chatting away. And JR has just started Pet Cemetery today. I've actually got just side little tangent while Owen's getting settled. I've got the Folio Society edition of Pet Cemetery, and it's an improvement on the original cover because the cat on the original cover just looks frazzled, doesn't look scary. That is scary. So I'm very happy with my Folio Pet Cemetery. Can you hear me, Owen? Okay, let me go ahead and message Owen.
Can you hear me?
I am letting Owen know I can hear him. The fun times.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. Are we going?
Okay,
are we good?
Yeah, we're going. We're going. We're having a discourse.
Yeah. We're cut out in post. It'll look professional. Hello, welcome to Andrew's Wizardly Reads. I'm Andrew, and this is Owen. And
yeah, except this is live. So
yeah. I was going to say, everyone forget the last 2 minutes.
yeah, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Owen was always here.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, to be honest.
I think Dan is talking about football. But yeah, I was talking about the October Country, Halloween Tree, Something Wicked, and how I felt Ray Bradbury was a clear influence on Stephen King.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's probably an influence on every big genre writer, particularly like in horror and ghost stories. I'd imagine since he started writing, and he started writing in the 1940s. So,
which I didn't know. I didn't realize because. So it was funny because I started researching Ray Bradbury when I fell in love with his writing. And I realized he was in his 90s when he passed, and so he had this
Yes.
long career that predated. Like I thought he started writing in like the 60s or something like that, and I was off by 2 decades. It was
Yeah, well,
fantastic to realize that.
he's sort of a new wave writer. You might think of him as a sci-fi writer. You know, the move away from really hard science fiction like Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke. It's really sometimes quite dry, quite straight, and it's much more stylized. But actually, Ray Bradbury is the pioneer, I think, of that style. He's very lyrical, very artistic.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the merry-go-round that is, and I don't know what they call them in the UK, but that's in Something Wicked This Way Comes, makes a clear influence. I don't know if you've read Stephen King's Fairy Tale yet, but there is something incredibly similar in Fairy Tale. And it is a direct influence that I loved seeing.
No, I'm not surprised. I think King is like a really different writer because King, I mean, is quite psychologically intense, quite kind of violent, obviously. Whereas Bradbury, a lot of it is implied. It's very much just there, usually in the background. But I think there's a really similar thing about the sort of poetry of horror, the poetry of ghost stories that, like, I definitely see in King. I should read more Stephen King.
Oh, I've read about 30 of them at this point, and I'm absolutely loving it. But there is Ray Bradbury has a more poetic flow. Like I instantly fell in love with his prose, just because it doesn't feel dated, but at the same time it feels timeless almost. Like it's a timeless style of prose that's not going to, I think, be irrelevant for at least another 100 years. I mean, it will stand the test of time.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and I think I agree. I mean, we'll talk about this. There are points where like it's like too much candy, like it can get very, very sweet. But I think he's a very good writer. And certainly in his very best stories, both in what we're going to talk about and in like the Martian Chronicles, and the Illustrated Man, they're just really gorgeous stories. And I think whatever he's doing, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, ghost stories, whatever, he's always filtering it through this kind of. He obviously loves writing. You kind of read some writers, really good, interesting writers, and you're like, they don't really like writing. They like getting a book out. They've got an idea. Whereas Bradbury loved writing, I think.
Yeah. It was funny. I went back on YouTube because YouTube stores things forever. And I was watching back a lecture that Bradbury gave at the end of his life. And he said, don't start out writing novels. Instead, write a short story a week. And I challenge you that by the end of the year to have 52 bad short stories. It can't be done. At least one of them is going to be decent. And he said that's how he got started. And I thought that was a very fascinating way to approach it. Because of course everybody now sets out to write as big a book as they possibly can for their debut. And
that's what the market is for.
That philosophy.
Yeah. I do think that's a big thing to do with the market. Like, what the writing interesting because we talked about this a bit, I think, in Discord, but the idea that Bradbury is a guy who just writes every day. He talks about that a lot. He talks about it in the introduction to my version of The October Country. Gene Wolfe was the same. He just writes all the time. And that is very different to writers who just kind of, the guys who retire when they're 40 with 2 big books, you know, those people who have a book that's going to come out in 10 years' time. We won't name them. But it's very different. But I think that's partly because the market now is towards big books and big series in the sci-fi fantasy genre, whereas it was much more heavy to small books and magazines, partly because paper was expensive, ink was expensive. And so
I don't know about you, but I actually find myself gravitating back to the older style. The more big books that I read, the more hesitant I am to read them. And I find myself starting to reach back for those shorter books.
Yeah. We've talked about Robin Hobb, as in you and I, and it's something I'm currently actually buddy reading Wizard of the Pigeons, one of her first books, which is very short and is really beautiful so far. But these 800-page books, where I'm like, I like this, but there's just too much of it. I'm having indigestion while reading these big long books, and it's why I haven't gone back and retried The Wheel of Time. I read the first 4 years ago and was like, yeah, they're okay, and I kind of like another go. But then you're committing to 14 times 800 pages. I just can't do that. Not unless I really know I'm going to love it.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair, and I think that's. Do you want to start with the October Country?
Yeah, that's the obvious one because is it his first collection or is it like a second book or something? It's really early in terms of books.
It's definitely early. It's a lot of the stuff from the 50s, I think, is where
Yeah,
it's from. So it's a
yeah,
lot of his
40s and
earlier
50s.
work, and I
Yeah.
think it's one of his most popular, other than I think Illustrated Man.
Hmm.
That is his
Yeah,
compiled short stories. And you
yeah,
kind of sent me like a brief synopsis of what you thought of each book,
yeah,
and I didn't respond because I wanted to talk about them live.
yeah, yeah,
Because I thought October Country actually started out fairly weak. We're not gonna like go full spoilers, but like
yeah.
we'll talk about each
Light
of the
spoilers,
stories.
light
Yeah,
spoilers.
light spoilers.
Yeah,
But like it starts out with a story called The Dwarf, and I've got my cheat sheet up. I told you I was pulling up a
yeah,
cheat sheet because it's
yeah, yeah.
19 short stories. There's no way I'm
Exactly.
gonna remember them all.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the table of contents.
Yeah, the dwarf just felt flat for me. Like I thought I had
Mm.
initially made a mistake when I read the
I've
dwarf.
missed something. Yeah,
Yeah, I was just like, okay, because the way Bradbury does the short stories is he doesn't answer the question. He leaves
yeah.
it kind of as a
Mm.
question where he'll
Usually, yeah.
either imply or
Mm.
like it'll just cut off right before the dramatic thing happens.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
And it just kind of moves on from there. And I both like it and I hate it at the same time. Because
yeah,
I'm just like, oh no, like you could have totally given me another 20 pages and I'd have eaten it all up.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but there's
And
also
I did think
oh,
a
go
couple
ahead.
of the stories actually felt too short. As I said to you,
Yeah,
I thought like I want more. But yeah,
like the
you go
dwarf.
for
The
it.
dwarf feels too short because it just kind of
Mm.
ends with somebody running away, and you're like, what's going on here? Why are you running away? It
Mm.
it it felt a bit murky.
Yeah, it read like an early work. It's got Bradbury's prose. There's bits of his kind of prose. I could probably literally just flick randomly, I think. A warm night, a hot morning, and a blazing noon. The sea was a sheet of burning tinsel and glass.
Yes,
That's a
perfect.
random sentence. The first one I came to. It's very, very. You can see it. It's very like painterly. You can really see the tinsel. That's a good image. But also, like the story doesn't. Nothing happens. It's basically it's about a person who suffers from dwarfism or has dwarfism comes to the carnival these people are at, and some of the workers mock him. Some of them are more sympathetic, and
Yeah,
basically there's a sort of metaphorical thing going on, but I don't really it just doesn't really have an ending. It just kind of, as Andrew says, it kind of just is like it ends like this, but it doesn't
yeah.
mean anything. It doesn't. It
There's
feels
no implied
pushed too hard.
menace that what's
Yeah,
going on because basically it's implied that this dwarf is going to seek some sort of retribution,
yeah,
but we never really see it. Like the dwarf just
yeah,
shows up, somebody runs away, and then fade to black.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just like, okay,
Yeah, you'll see him be more successful at doing this in other stories. But you're right. I think the first story is felt like that, and I think the first couple had this kind of problem that they just sort of end or they don't quite pull off the conclusion. Yeah, because I think you said the first three stories you felt like that about.
but before we move on to the second story, I
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
need
please
to,
do.
of course, stress that
Yeah.
anybody watching this now or on a rerun needs to go subscribe to Owen's channel because I have it linked in the description box down below. I need to get that out of the way
Yeah,
now
yeah,
so that we can
yeah.
then okay.
Please do. Owen Edwards book reviews.
Yeah,
Mostly
it's linked in the description.
classic sci-fi, fantasy, and Dungeons and Dragons too.
I
So
think that's so cool.
yeah,
What did you think of? Because I think the next one is it's next in line, and I
next in line.
thought this one, I thought it had a lot of promise, but
Mm,
I thought the ending fell a little flat because basically this husband and wife, I'm assuming from either America or the UK, have
mm,
gone to Mexico during the Day of the Dead, or
yeah,
just right before or right after the Day of the Dead. I was gonna
yeah.
say the actual line of what it's called, like in Mexico, and I knew I was gonna get it wrong.
Yeah, that's very sensible. If you don't know, just don't say.
Yeah, like I can say it here,
Yeah,
and then when I try and translate it out, that was gonna come out a garbled mess.
yeah.
Uh,
No,
so I'll
it's
say
the
Day of the
classic
Dead.
American or British thing. If you say whatever the foreign word is or phrase is very loudly in your own accent, everyone's like, okay,
It's got to land.
yeah, they'll understand. They'll understand.
Yeah,
No,
you're
yeah,
getting it right just through passion alone.
The next in line is actually the longest story in the October Country.
Yeah, and that's why I thought it showed so much promise, because it deals with the fact that people in Mexico, or at least in this small town, rent the graves, and if people can't pay the rent, they then take the bodies out and storm all in this like tiny room.
Yeah,
and
they mummify. Basically. They dry out. Yeah,
they mummify, and this husband, I think he's a photographer or an artist or something, wants to go see these mummies, and the wife is just utterly traumatized by him.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is I hated that husband. Like that relationship dynamic has not aged well at all. And in fact, I think even back then, this was a bad husband.
No, I think so. This isn't like, Bradbury secretly thought, or he thought back in the day, husbands should be neglectful and borderline abusive. No. Bradbury thinks the guy is terrible.
Yeah.
It's interesting because possibly, I don't think in 1945 or 1950, most people thought their husbands should be neglectful and abusive. But you can imagine some people reading that story and being like, man, this guy's great. What's the problem? You can imagine someone's reading that and thinking, this is really good. But obviously, Bradbury wants us to see that him dismissing his wife and seeing her fears as just ridiculous, and her as just annoying is like, really destructive, basically, because she is having massive full-on morbidity.
Like she develops a phobia and she manifests it almost.
No, she has like a breakdown. Yeah. Which does connect to, we'll get it, that obviously the skeleton feels like a rerun of the same thing in terms of the way it concludes, the way it sorts the problem out. I thought they're very similar stories.
I thought that the skeleton though had a much more clear ending than
it did. I think that's part of why it was effective, was that it did have an ending, whereas I feel like the next in line again just goes like, hey, it kind of ends, but it's just like, hey, here's the ending, the end, next story.
I liked her slow descent into this fear of not only this town, but of mummies, and this certainty that she's never going to escape. Yeah, that she's never going to leave this town. And she at the end, she's begging, like, please, if I don't survive, don't bury me here. Don't bury me here. And he just dismisses her.
Yeah. He's not a great guy. Didn't like him.
No, he was initially I was like, this is an enthusiastic guy. He likes mummies, and like I like mummies, and like, oh, you're an awful human being.
Yeah, I think it's this kind of, he's very detached and clinical. He just thinks it's also partly, I think you're probably allowed to see it. I'm thinking partly because Bradbury comes back to the Day of the Dead in Halloween Tree.
Yeah, he does.
Can partly see it. Bradbury is quite sympathetic with this local culture. He knows he's not from it, but he's like, oh, this is interesting. Whereas this tourist is just a tourist. He's like, I'll take some photos. Oh, this is weird. Like he's very patronizing, very dismissive.
Let's take some pictures of some dead people.
Yeah.
Sure.
And his wife's like, this is weird and morbid. And he's like, yeah, it's great, isn't it? He literally says that. She's like, this is terrible. They're all dead. Like, yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
So probably
Book Songs and Other Magic says skeleton is classic Bradbury. And I agree. Yeah. I thought
that's the first one you liked. That's the first one you liked.
Yeah, that's that. From there on is when the October Country really gripped me, because the next one is the poker chip, the watchful poker chip of H.
Matisse, Henri Matisse, the artist. Yeah, your European contingent, Henri Matisse.
Yeah. And I thought
it's just very forgettable. There's a bit of a nothing story.
Yeah, it's the first one where I thought it had an overall through line, but at the same time, it just kind of does nothing. It's basically somebody who's just tired of feeling irrelevant. Yeah.
And so does weird stuff to get attention, which is a concept, but it's not.
So that one, there's really not a whole lot to say about it other than it just doesn't. It was the first one where I was like, okay, that was a solid story, but I don't have any strong feelings about it.
It structurally is okay, whereas the next in line and the dwarf both kind of end. But the skeleton is the next one, which obviously Book Songs and Other Magic has just said.
I think that's the first time where the poetry and then the psychology of this character, Bradbury weaves them together very beautifully. And then he adds in a small supernatural element as well to up the horror aspect of it. And it was great. I loved everything pretty much about the skeleton.
Oh
You
yeah,
just
I thought yeah,
see this guy, and like he goes to the doctor. He's like, "You're a hypochondriac. Like, you need to calm down."
yeah. Well, the
Which I can
doctor,
sympathize because I've had a
yeah,
hypochondria phase before where like I was scared of everything.
yeah, yeah.
That was a long time
Were you
ago,
scared of
but
your own skeleton?
no, I never got that bad. I lost my mother to cancer, and so I was always convinced
Yeah,
that like
I can imagine.
I was developing some sort of illness that was like it was right after. It was like the couple of years after that that like I
I
really
can
dealt with
imagine. Yeah, yeah,
hypochondria really
yeah,
badly,
yeah. Well,
and
I think
I've
both the
since
skeleton. Sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say I've since moved past that, but
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it.
yeah.
The next in line in the skeleton deal with that this issue of morbidity, of the fear of death, of the fear of your own body and what's going to happen to it with age, with death. And it's
Mm-hmm.
obviously something Bradbury finds interesting is this that idea, and that's I think the skeleton does it better because, like you say, it marries up and the structure and the themes really well. Where the next in line just
Kind of just
interesting, and then it ends. Yeah. So yeah, I think the skeleton and like the short story needs to be. Gene Wolfe is really good at short stories too. Actually, this is you can see these people who make themselves great short story writers tend to be really good at structure, but they
mm-hmm.
need to be able to learn that to compress the information. I think Bradbury's stories, most of the rest of the October Country, not every story, but most of them are just really tight. They don't feel like they're wasting your time at any point. Everything is always doing something. Which,
Well,
yeah, I think
I love the analysis of, or the idea, I should say, of a duality between flesh and skeleton, and
yeah,
which is in control of which. And
yeah,
basically, this gentleman in the story comes to see himself, his flesh, as separate and in direct competition with his skeleton. And we find out later that that's all a manipulation.
yeah.
Which is very interesting. And it ends on I would say, a fairly strong horror note. I don't
Yeah,
want to.
it is a horror story. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it is. It is a horror story, and I think Bradbury's genre is really interesting. I'll touch on this quickly. We talked about it again on Discord, but the fact that for Martian Chronicles, he says, "I wrote sci-fi. I stopped writing it because it was bad. I wrote stories. I then wrote sci-fi again, but it was only 5% sci-fi, 95% fantasy. So his genre is really complex because there's some stories in here which are not really anything. Like H. Matisse is weird, but it's not a horror story.
Right.
You've got ones. The Dwarf isn't a horror story as far in a strict sense. Maybe it's borderline horror. You've got some that are ghost stories, which are kind of a different thing to horror, and some are just fantasy. There's one or two of them which are just fantasy, I think, or like something like that. You know, so
there's
really
the two Ellis,
Mm-hmm.
Elliot. Is it the Elliot family?
Yeah, the two Uncle Einar, Uncle Einar and whatever the kid is called. Yeah, those ones.
Elliot family. So because he was friends with, we're just gonna jump out of order and knock those out real quick while we're talking about it.
Let's do it.
There's Uncle Einar, and then there's Homecoming. And basically, Bradbury was friends with Adams, who created his own family, the Adams family, which is very, very famous, very popular, and obviously became more famous than the Elliot family. And they're very, very similar, except that the Elliot family has a bunch of they're actual monsters, and a lot of them are undead, a lot of them are immortal. So Uncle Einar kind of deals with one of the members of the Elliot family kind of losing his supernatural ability to fly, and then kind of regaining that ability. But there's no real horror in it. It's just him settling down and having a family, and then his kids giving him a solution on how to get back his power of flight.
Yeah. Oh, it's just a really nice story.
Yeah.
Uncle Einar. I think that's the thing is you could say it has horror trappings, inverted commas, but it's not, as you said, it's not a horror story. It's just about a fantastic creature. It's just a fantasy story. And arguably Homecoming is the same because though there are a bunch of Addams Family type ghosts and ghoulies, nothing horrific happens really. There's like moments.
Yeah, I think that deals with Timothy, I think is his name.
Timothy, yeah.
Yeah, Timothy is basically the only mortal in an immortal family, and he's trying to be like the rest of his family.
Yeah.
And he's not really fitting in. And then it kind of ends on a somber note, but also a touching note where his mother kind of pulls him to the side and says, we'll love you even when you're gone, if you don't find a way to join the rest of us, type of deal.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, and Uncle Einar, isn't it? Technically, Homecoming
Yeah.
comes before the Uncle Einar story. That's in their chronology. They're just out of
Oh,
order in the
okay.
book.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so in From the Dust Returned, which is the collection that they made fairly late in Bradbury's life, 2002
Yeah,
or
it came out
something.
2001, I believe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's the order. Homecoming comes first, but Uncle Einar's a nice guy. Like a lot of the rest of the family are kind of weird and creepy, even if they're not horrible. Whereas Uncle Einar is just a nice guy. So Uncle Einar, hey man, it doesn't matter. Maybe you've got some advantages. He's literally like, hey, there's upsides, downsides.
Yeah.
No, I really liked both those stories. They're two of my favorite, and I'm really up for reading From the Dust Returned.
I'm absolutely going to add that to my repertoire of Bradbury. Bradbury's become like my palate cleanser read. Where like whenever I need something short, but I think I'm going to really love, and I'm just burnt out on like horror, fantasy, or sci-fi, because you said literally his style is very amorphous. He can kind of fit into all three, and while kind of fulfilling none of them. And so I'm going to reach for Bradbury for quite a while.
Yeah, I agree. Book Songs and Other Magic. Yeah, The Homecoming is predictable. I think it's also a general Bradbury thing. Not just genre is amorphous, but your expectations. You have no idea what's going to happen. He's one of the very few writers like where you really don't know what the end of the story will be necessarily.
I'm missing all with you. I'm missing all of the comments, aren't I? Well, they were absolutely, they were in real life friends. So it's very much documented that they knew each other, even when Adams was before Adams created the Adams family. They talked about it, and they kind of went off and did their own families, and of course Adams became the most famous.
It's interesting. Probably Adams has the more famous property, the Adams family, because of the films. But Bradbury is comfortably the more famous writer. Like Bradbury is he is an inner circle Hall of Famer, we'd call it in baseball terms. He is absolutely in the top tier of sci-fi fantasy writers. But as you say, I think because he also writes quite short stories. Many of them are only 10 pages, 20 pages. You can just dip in and say, I'll read a couple of these, just as you say, clear my head. And it's not like they're shallow. He always has ideas because he is an ideas writer. Like he's not, but his ideas are not about what happens if you had this technology. His idea is more like, what are people like? What's death about? Like he's
a very, very, very intelligent writer.
Yeah. I agree. And easy to read though. He kind of marries those up. Is that he's very approachable, but he's always, asking interesting questions.
One of the ones that I loved, going back to the collection, was the jar. I loved the jar.
Yeah.
Because it kind of takes what didn't work in the Watchful Poker Chip of H. Matisse, and it expounds on that idea, going a step further of, instead of trying to be relevant, is securing something that makes you relevant. And then kind of putting it in a small town, and everybody kind of trying to figure out what the oddity is. And then it throws in an additional layer where he's got a very awful wife. She was very cruel, very just didn't. I don't know, like I don't remember the exact specifics, but I remember her being very kind of degrading towards him, which ends very poorly for her, or at least it's implied it ends poorly for her. And then the jar actually does become rather interesting towards the end, because initially it's like, what is this stuff? Because he picks up the jar from a carnival, which means it's probably just a gag or something, but he uses it to kind of get acclaim amongst his friends group.
Yeah, I think you're right. It definitely connects to H. Matisse, and it obviously connects to all his other carnival stories. So in here, we've already had the dwarf. So is something wicked. Right. This may come. So is technically the frame for Illustrated Man. He's really interested in this idea of the transitoriness of the carnival and the mixture of fake and real, which we'll talk about in Something Wicked, I guess. But like the fake and the real and the merger. And I think, So I think it just works well. It feels like all the stakes are clear about Tom. I think it's Tom. His relevance, the fact he's interesting, everyone comes over all the time, the fact his wife is jealous in some way. And then the way that ends, it feels like in that sense it's like the skeleton. It feels like it has a clear kind of ending, even if not everything is said. It's like it's a really interesting kind of clear ending rather than a non-ending. So again, yeah,
Right.
I really liked the jar. I think from that point, I didn't dislike any story after that, really, even if a couple were maybe weaker. I think the jar, and then the next one, the lake. The lake was one of my favorites.
Let's see.
I got
Honestly, I don't
yeah.
have a clear memory of the lake. That one didn't.
So
Oh, no,
didn't
wait.
land.
That
Yeah.
So okay, so that's the one who was a boy, and then the
Mm.
person goes missing, and he leaves and comes home,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
sandcastle. That's the sandcastle, isn't it?
Yeah. That
Okay.
it's a ghost story.
Yeah.
Ghost stories being it's amorphous, but ghost stories and horror for me are kind of different. That they work on different emotions, they look for different conclusions. Like ghost stories tend to be more about the eerie and the unknown and the kind of moral of the supernatural, whatever the supernatural turns out to be in the particular story. Whereas horror stories tend to be a lot more about like, oh man, this is just horrible. I'm scared for my own safety, that kind of thing. Like it's about, in that case, it's about morbidity. And I think, yeah, the lake is based on a true story in that a childhood friend of his went missing in a lake. So he's like, yeah,
Oh,
I
really?
remember. Yeah. He in the introduction to my one, which is May I Die Before My Voices, which is about him talking about learning to write and then writing every day. And he's like, hey, if I want to never wake up and not have something to write, I want to be dead before that point. So yeah, he says, oh yeah, that was actually, I think fairly early story for him, but he talks about how he, I fell into becoming halfway excellent by the sheerest of word association accidents. When I was 22, I began to make lists of nouns to try to jar my subconscious into sitting up to beg for delivery. It didn't work until one hot noon when, sitting in the sun with my portable typewriter, I wrote this, the lake. And suddenly I recalled the summer when I was 7 and a blonde girl companion busy building a sandcastle ran into the lake and never came back. Death and drowning, drowning and death. What a mystery. Swiftly, I set about remembering the day with my typewriter. By late afternoon, the lake was finished and I was in tears. I knew that at long last, after years of dumb obfuscation, I'd turned inward, discovered whatever might be original in my head, and caught it on paper. So he's basically like, that is, the lake is his breakthrough moment for him. And it's because of this thing where he connected, like he just was making random noun lists and he's like, no, that reminds me of something where there's a mystery, which I guess is really definitional for him. All these weird, what's really going on in this situation is so often the
Very
question for
cool.
him. Yeah. I liked the
For
lake.
for me, no, the as soon as I remember the sandcastle, I liked the lake, but I
Yeah.
thought the emissary was a better ghost story.
Yeah, the emissary is also definitely whatever is actually going on in it. It is definitely a ghost story, I
It's
think. Yeah.
it's left very very up to interpretation, but
Yeah.
basically, like a boy is sick, and his dog goes out and brings people to kind of
Mm,
see him, and then the dog goes missing,
mm.
and he's missing his dog. He's missing his dog. He calls his dog, and I believe it's implied he calls the dog back from the grave, and then the dog brings somebody back with him.
Yeah, the dog has possibly gone, but it's not really. It's kind of, it's actually really ambivalent ending. It's something which Bradbury's favorite ghost story writer. I'm going to plug him here because I talk about him on my channel. I've actually read some of his stories on the channel. Russell Kirk, who, amongst other things, was a great ghost story writer who Bradbury and Madeleine L'Engle and some others really liked. And for Kirk, the ending would not be ambiguous. The ending would be like, it might be left not fully described, but you'd be like, okay, there's something emotionally robust about this. You'd know what to feel. Whereas actually, the emissary, really interestingly and intentionally, leaves you like, what's going on here? Like, how am I meant to feel about what's coming to see this boy?
Yeah.
So
The
yeah, I thought that was good.
Yeah, no, the emissary was very good. I didn't care for Touched with Fire. I thought it was very murky,
Mm.
and I didn't have the two men that are kind of in the story. Their justification seemed very odd to me, so that one felt flawed from the outset to me.
So Touch with Fire is like a gimmick story. I think that's the
Yeah,
way to think about it. Is two insurance salesmen have retired and they're like, man, we could help people not need life insurance, or at least they're not die. We could warn them, hey, we're used to people who have really high premiums. So we'll tell you if you've got a really high premium and then you could do better. They'll be like life advice people. And then there's this woman who's just really difficult and unpleasant, basically. And they're
Yeah.
like, we need to help her. And it's kind of a fun idea, but it's just, you can, sometimes there's a thing that's a fun idea, but it's just not there in reality. And I think the story just is flat because of that. It wasn't terrible. It kind of had a beginning, middle, and end. It made sense, but I wouldn't reread it.
Yeah.
We
You had thoughts on The Small Assassin.
We disagreed a bit. I think we both liked it. So The Small Assassin, I talked about this I've just reviewed the October Country, and I did talk about this, that it's a really powerful story.
Right.
Basically, a woman, they're a married couple, and they have their baby, and it's lovely. Baby's arrived, except the mother seems to be suffering from what we would describe, and I think Bradbury obviously sees it like this: postnatal depression, postpartum depression. She's very, very alienated from her child. Really interestingly, it's and this is something which you see, is observable scientifically now. Is she's had a cesarean section, and there are often issues with PND in those circumstances. Not always, but like you can really sympathise with this woman who's having this real trouble with connecting to her baby. Thinks her baby wants to kill her, or something like crazy.
Right.
And her husband's like, chill out. But like gradually, essentially, things just start to unwind and get weird, and it's and become paranoid. And I thought that was really good. And I thought the ending was basically a bit on the nose. I won't say anything more than that, but I just thought the ending was a bit on the nose. It was a bit like
I can definitely see the ending being too on the nose, but at the same time,
you liked it. You liked it.
I did like it. It felt like the most definitive ending of what was about to happen, and I think I kind of attributed it to almost mixing in a postpartum depression story with almost an Antichrist story. There was definitely an interesting element of like having all of these events happening. I don't know. I kind of liked the end. If it had gone even one page further, I would have disliked it.
Yeah. It ended when it needed to. I agree with that. It had to kind of be like, I think one thing that definitely makes it horror, whatever one thinks of the exact ending, is that it marries up a real world existential problem. So, morbidity for the skeleton is an example, like your body alienation. In this case, it's the way in which we feel disconnected from people. And in this case, particularly that experience that some others have with their children, which is obviously really difficult. And it marries that up with like a potential horror theme. Like, what if this is really dangerous or real? Like The Exorcist is about a guy who's struggling with his faith and with why he's here, what he's doing. And that is externalized with the fact there's a demon in this little girl. This girl is corrupted, turned against her family. And you can see that's the tension, isn't it? Is this guy who doesn't know if he even believes in anything, comes face to face with evil, and he has to decide what to do. And it's the same in this, isn't it? That like, I have a real problem, and it is externalized with this horrific element. Pet Sematary is just that clowns. Sorry, it is just that clowns are creepy, for instance.
Yeah. Well, it is different. It is more like it shows that people are real monsters.
Yeah.
And that like an external event just amplifies what's going on in Derry, Maine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And it's about the way in which childhood friendship changes, dies, can be reborn. Like, you never really stop being the child you were. There's loads of stuff going on with the theme there, isn't there? And I think The Small Assassin is one of the best stories for doing that genre thing. So I really liked it. Book songs really liked it too. I really liked it. I wouldn't have minded a more ambiguous ending. As you say, you liked it. So,
what did you think of the crowd?
Yeah, the crowd, I guess, is more ghost story like, isn't it? It's weird. It's a bit of it's got some horror elements, but it has this sort of supernatural judgment and oversight where apparently at every car accident the same faces turn up. In a district, there'll be the same faces to every car accident. Turns out, as far as it's, this guy seems, it's clear that no, that's really weird.
Yeah. But it was implied that the reason he had his second accident is because he realized. And so he was...
I wasn't sure what to think about that. Like, because it is left quite ambiguous as to what this crowd is or what they do. Yeah. Are they there to... Is it like to do with the scythe and to do with the necessity of death? Is it that they're like... I mean, there's weird demons who, but that is literally what you're told they do. I
Yeah.
like, you know,
It
was
was
definitely,
good. It wasn't
strange.
it was kind of
Yeah.
middling in the collection, but it
Yeah.
wasn't it wasn't one of my least favorites. I'm trying to go
Yeah,
through
I
them
think it's
quick.
that. Yeah. So we can move on to next. I think it's just that it's not clear what you're meant to think about it. Yeah. Jack in the Box, I thought was great. One of the best stories in the book.
You see, I disagree.
Oh, well, you hated it. I don't know.
No,
Did you hate it?
I didn't hate it, but
Yeah.
I thought in the end it was just kind of the last like couple paragraphs when we're at the policeman basically is just like he's like, oh, this crazy kid is running around, and like it's just like, oh, okay, like so the mother was a monster and basically like traps her son in the house and tries to make him feel like a god. I didn't understand the justification of like I could understand like hoarding a child from a certain perspective, but trying to convince this child that it is a deity feels weird. I couldn't get behind the premise of the story.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it's a story. The core of the story is about the mother's grief. Like, dad dies, he's killed presumably in a car accident. That seems to be implied, like he's killed by one of the big noisy monsters from beyond the trees. And the mother kind of goes crazy in grief. And I'll basically spoil this, like splits her personality and has like a nice personality who, you know, like mother is very controlling and the teacher is very nice. It's very strange. And I thought that was really, that was the horror element, but then it kind of just ends. That's what I'd say is it's too short. It doesn't fully develop its themes. But the other thing was, I was like, oh, the setting here is amazing. It's kind of like a Little Big or something else. Like it's this kind of magical house of wonder that this kid is finding out about that eventually maybe it turns out sort of a prison, not fully, but sort of a prison. It's a sad story that it does that well. It kind of, again, it's not quite long enough. It's one of the rare cases where I thought, as I said at the start, I was like, I want this to be longer. I want to know a bit more, see a bit more. And I think maybe that would have answered your criticism, because you're like, what was I meant to think about that? You know, what was the why was that a good concept? As you say, you could just conclude, okay, well, I hated the mother, but I think we're meant to feel sympathetic. But yeah.
It wasn't one of my favorites.
No, the Scythe is the title story for me. The Scythe
was one of the best.
Yeah,
in
I think
the
it's quite
entire collection. It's not the best, but it's probably my second favorite in the collection.
No, I thought it was really fun. It's fun is maybe the wrong word. I think other than perhaps it gets a bit try hard at the end. It has a similar issue. Like I say, he sometimes gets he just goes over the top. I thought the fact this guy turns up, it's in the Depression. It's a John Steinbeck story. They're driving along in a jalopy. They need water. He swallows his pride. He goes to ask the farmer. The farmer's dead and has bequeathed his farm to this man. Whoever turns up gets to have the farm. And it has weird corn, like maize, that grows or grain or whatever. It might be grain that grows each day or whatever. And then you have to keep cutting it. And you're constantly having to move to the next bit of the field because there's new grain there that has to be cut. And there's always grain growing behind you. And pretty quickly it becomes clear this is some sort of like metaphysical thing to do with life and death. And this guy is like, I don't want to do this. This is weird. What's going on? And then he's like, oh, I have to do it. So there's this, it's really fantasy. It's not horror or anything. It's very much a fantasy of what happens if you are made death, like the Discworld death almost.
Yeah, it was really good. And he tries to change things and there's ramifications to it. I don't know. I thought it was so well realized. And this one, I think, had the best ending. Like, it was a definitive ending to the story because it kind of jumps forward to modern times. And from there, we kind of get to see that he's still at it. And he's kind of just accepted his fate and become the Reaper almost.
Yeah. No, it was good. I imagine for lots of people that will be their favorite or one of their favorites.
Book says that the Steinbeck mention is great. It's just a fantastic collection. I loved it.
I think so. I think something like Grapes of Wrath and seeing that for Bradbury, he doesn't see this in terms of like the grind and the horrible side, like, isn't this depressing? Look at the economic conditions. He'll know that, but he sees it in terms of the personal crisis, and in some way that connects to him becoming the sidesman. We've talked about Uncle Einar. The Wind was kind of fine. The Wind was
good.
It was a pleasant. It was genuinely pleasant. It was fun to read. It's kind of like a almost Lovecraftian secondhand horror story where you hear, oh, this guy told me all this weird stuff, which is very Lovecraft, I find. And
it was definitely plenty of ideas there.
It's also the guy's literally like, I went to the mountains of Tibet and the weird supernatural forces followed me home, which is also very Lovecraft.
Yeah.
But it's the wind. The wind, or something in the wind, is going after this guy's friend, and the guy kind of believes him, but his wife thinks his friend's crazy because obviously he's saying the wind is trying to kill him. So the wind is just there. It's kind of in the middle. Yeah. Man Upstairs. What's interesting here is this is the same lead character from Dandelion Wine and Farewell Summer, which is in the same town as Something Wicked, Greentown. Also, pretty obviously, the Halloween Tree. So yeah, the Man Upstairs connects into his universe of Greentown, because Doug Spalding, living in his grandparents' boarding house, is a major character in 2 of his books. And here, Doug Spalding,
I'll be looking for that.
You got to. Doug Spalding realizes the new guest. He's like, this new guest is really creepy and weird. That's basically the story.
Well, yeah, but then also Doug does something a bit.
He goes rogue. He goes rogue, doesn't he?
Yeah. He does his own thing. He's a real go-getter.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't fault him for ambition.
Yeah, right.
No, I enjoyed it. It was kind of fun. That's a couple of stories. The Wind and There Was a Man. The Man Upstairs are just more stories, aren't they? They're just kind of nice.
Yeah.
There Was an Old Woman I thought was better. I thought There Was an Old Woman was funny. I thought it was clever.
That was probably my third favorite.
It had kind of a twist ending, obviously without giving away the ending, but this doesn't want to die, has promised to herself she'll never die. It then seems she's died, and she's not happy about it.
Yeah.
She is not accepting the situation.
I love the humor. There was a lot of humor in this one.
Yeah, no, I thought it was one of the funny ones.
Yeah, this is the only collection that was actually funny, because she goes to the funeral home and she berates the people there until they give her back her body.
Yeah.
And
they're like, hilarious. This isn't going to work. They're like, this isn't going to work. And her niece is like, this isn't going to work. Like, don't do this. And she's like, nope, I'm going to go and get my corpse. So it's basically a story about a really stubborn old woman. And that's all it's about. And it works very well. And it has a definitive ending. Andrew's obviously talked about kind of enjoying that kind of this is the way it's going. The Cistern is not a horror story or ghost story, by the way, is it? The Cistern is just a sad story.
Yeah, this is the one about the woman talking to her sister, realizing that her lover is dead.
Yeah, basically. And yeah,
that one was very forgettable.
Yeah, it was sad. I was like, man, that's depressing. But there wasn't really much to it. There Was an Old Woman was really good. Cistern more forgettable. Homecoming we've talked about, and then your favorite story at the end. Probably my favorite story.
It was on the nose, but at the same time, it was on the nose in a creative way. Seeing an author kind of analyze their relevance in such a creative and short story, because essentially Dudley Stone is The Wonderful Death of Dudley Stone, and Dudley Stone, it's this guy who is a fan of a writer called Dudley Stone, who just randomly stops writing. And nobody can figure out why he stopped writing, at the height of his career. And a lot of people are saying, oh, Dudley Stone's dead. And so he's just like, no, he's not dead. He hears all these articles. He's in this small town. So he goes to see him. And finally, Dudley
is like, oh, I was murdered.
Yeah, I was murdered. And he's like, what? Tell me the story. And he relates this story. And it's such a good story because Dudley comes up with this creative solution.
Nico.
Oh, is Nico here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Nico. I told you it's the middle of the workday here.
Yeah.
But
everyone should quit their jobs just for our 12 o'clock streams.
Oh, yeah, they totally should. But there was such an analyzation on relevance, on chasing dreams, on living life, on valuing what's important,
Yeah.
and knowing your own worth.
Oh
That
yeah.
like there was so much in there, and the value of friendship at the same time. Probably Dudley Stone needs to work on who he considers a friend, but
His boundaries are very poor.
yeah, he's got a very low bar.
Yeah.
He's like, oh
I
yeah,
was
we
gonna say,
reconciled. I was like, what?
yeah,
Okay,
I thought, well, but you can't not like that. You know what I mean? You can say,
yeah,
ooh, but I think the fact that is that he's like, look, the this crisis made me think, and my murder made me think about what I should do with my life, and as you say, what my life was valuable for. And it turns out it's like I really love I should love my wife. We've got a kid. He's getting married. Stuff like this. Like it turns out that his sense of yeah, I think it's interesting because Bradbury, of course, never does that. Bradbury never is like, oh, if I died, I'd want to not be. He literally be a writer till I die. But he can see this idea that actually you need to know, but you need to not push yourself too far. It's better to leave them waiting. Is
yeah,
it's the classic Kurt Cobain career move. Let's call it that.
yeah.
Or
27
leaves them
books.
wanting more. Yeah. So I know, I indeed. I mean, I'm not suggesting anyone follow that, but like, it's this idea you should leave them wanting more, and also that writing can be cruel, like publishing can be cruel. I think is part of it, because part of it is he's like his friend who was just as good a writer as him wasn't successful. Why? Don't know. There's no explanation. Like he doesn't say there is. He's just like just luck.
Yeah,
And you think
like, I got lucky.
you can see Bradbury thought this. Yeah, Bradbury probably thought, oh well, I'm just lucky to be successful. But there were other hard workers, and I think, yeah.
It
What
was
do you want to talk about
literally thinking about that
Go for
short story always makes me smile.
Yeah,
Like that
yeah,
one is particularly special.
yeah.
Next,
It's
I
a
think we
great
should do
ending
Halloween
too.
3.
Halloween Tree, yeah,
I think because I grew up on the animation. I've actually got the DVD upstairs.
mm,
I've got the original artwork.
yeah, yeah.
And
I have quite the yearling copy, which is both October Country and Halloween Tree. I said to Andrew are American copies, just because Amazon stocks them in Britain. But yeah, I like my cover. It's nice. It's a really short book. It's
very short.
145 pages, and lots of that is illustrations by Joe Munyaini.
So mine's got the an additional thing in the back where like there was a manuscript for like a televised or no, a radio drama that Bradbury did. So my full edition is that's the afterword. Hold on. Where are you? There we go. It's 106 pages.
Yeah. Yeah, mine is longer, but mine is lots of illustrations. Both of mine are illustrated. These two are both illustrated by Joseph Munyaini. Or Mugnani, perhaps. Yeah. Both of mine. Let's get a night. I really like his illustrations. They're really thematic.
Yeah, it's very, very well done. But this one, like, this was a really cool one.
Yeah. I love the illustration.
It's really about, it's a history lesson is what it is. And it's a history lesson basically to save somebody. It's also, there's so much built into the Halloween Tree because it's a gang of boys, which differs from the movie. I believe there's a couple girls in the movie.
There's like a girl and 3 boys, I think, in the movie. Yeah.
That change was, I think, made because the movie came out in like I think the 80s.
92. I think this
92.
is 72. So I think it's a smaller cast and it's mixed because obviously they're looking for the broad audience. They're trying to be more engaged with that. But yeah, it's a classic Bradbury story in terms of it being a gang of boys. That's a very Bradbury thing of like young boys running around town, some small town Illinois. This is pretty obviously, it doesn't say it is, but it's in the same town pretty clearly as this and Dandelion Wine. And it has a creepy ravine. That's a common theme in his things is because there was a ravine in Waukegan where he grew up. So it's like this creepy ravine that I was scared of is just in so many of his stories. And yeah, gangs of boys.
It obviously made an impact.
Yeah, well, And presumably as a young boy living at his grandparents a lot of the time, which comes up like in The Man Upstairs, he obviously is big on male friendship, isn't he? Because you've got, this is all about male friends, this is all
Right.
about male friends. Like, it's a common theme in his stories, but the film obviously does a different spin on that for a different audience, which
Right.
I've heard really good things about it. I've not seen the film, but I've heard
It's
really good
good.
things about it.
You should totally watch it.
Yeah, I will.
Mount Shroud is voiced by Leonard Nimoy.
So I've heard. So yeah, Clavicle Moundshroud is a weird guy in a house who maybe is death or something, who helps the boys go and find their friend who seems ill and has gone missing, and they're not sure what's happening on Halloween because they need their friend who's the best of them. He's like the excited one who always comes up with new ideas. He's really
He's the
brave and
perfect boy.
adventurous. Yeah, indeed. And the rest really want their friend Pipkin, but he's not there. He's not at his house. No one's at his house. And Clavicle Moundshroud, who may be death, is like, yeah, let's go and find him. And like you say, it's a history lesson about, I guess, about Halloween, but it's not just about Halloween, is it?
Yeah. So it's about friendship. It's about Halloween. Sorry, I was reading the comment. He's having a lot of fun. So that's really good.
Yeah. I'm having a lot of fun. I'd do this again.
Oh, absolutely. But so one of the cool things is, I think, to do a slight correction, I think Pipkin is home. And initially,
I think it's not clear. Yeah,
he's ill, and he says, "I'll catch up to you guys. You go ahead."
Yeah. Oh no, he does, doesn't he?
catch
Yeah, he says,
up.
yeah.
And then it turns out, I think it's implied later in the book that he's got appendicitis.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. You talk, Andrew.
Okay. So one of the things I love about it is this group of boys, and so they go throughout their Halloween night and start trick-or-treating. And as they go trick-or-treating, they reach the last house, which is Moundshroud's house. It's this creepy old mansion with this big door knocker, and they knock and they try to do trick-or-treat. Moundshroud offers to do a trick instead, and then he kind of implies that something is he kind of implies that something is wrong with Pipkin and that they need to go on this adventure to help him. And so it's this adventure through time, learning the history of Halloween while they kind of chase Pipkin, who has taken something. Well, I might be mixing up the movie, because in the movie, Pipkin takes a pumpkin from the Halloween tree and Moundshroud wants to retrieve it. That is not carried over into the book. But Pipkin is fleeing through time and appearing at all these different iterations of Halloween. And then the friends are kind of chasing after him, only to kind of make a deal at the end to potentially save Pipkin's life.
Was that you just summarizing the story? Is that
I just did a whole summary of the story.
Yeah.
And there's a small difference between the motivation for Moundshroud to help with Pipkin between the movie and the book. Because I was saying in the movie, Pipkin has basically got up to some mischief, and his spirit has taken a pumpkin down off the Halloween tree, and Moundshroud wants it back. And so they are kind of chasing Pipkin on this whirlwind chase through time in the movie. But that is not the case in the book.
That's it. Though Bradbury, I'd say, so you can't say it's not a faithful adaptation. I've not seen it, but it must be, because Bradbury wrote it and narrated it. He co-wrote it and narrated it. It's compared to Something Wicked, the adaptation of which he was really frustrated with in the end. Like, Halloween Tree was his baby. Thanks, Marcus. It was my grandfather's sweater.
Very nice.
But the Halloween Tree is, the film was his baby. At the same this is more Bradburian in terms of the theme, I would argue, because this issue of like death, the liminality of existence. Like, think about the lake, which we've already talked about. Think about this. I mean, with the skeleton and the next in line, and this both deal with the Mexican mummies of the poor. Like, it's a big theme for him. And so the idea that, and the emissary is about a sick kid, he's really, it sounds weird, but he's really into this. It's something he thinks about a lot. And I think the fact that Pipkin may be dying, that seems to be what's implied, and that they have to, and they're thinking about their friendship. Do they? I guess it's the same, trying to rescue him, but I think the fact that he could die, but if you go and find him and rescue him, then he won't, and they have to count the cost of friendship, which I think I found really moving, really touching. It's two things. It's a history of rituals of death and rebirth, which I guess we can talk about, a bit, and it's about friendship. Those are the two things I think the book is about.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the
Yeah.
deeper themes of the story.
Yeah.
And I forget. So that they go to the Day of the Dead. They go to. Oh, I'm not gonna remember.
They go to
The
loads of
Day of
places.
the
They
Dead
go
is
to
the one I always remember the most. Oh, they go to the Time of the Mummies.
yeah.
They go to. You're gonna have to help me out.
They go to the Druids and
Yep.
Samhain, and they go to they learn about witches. They go to Notre Dame, and a
Yep.
big thing.
Notre
One thing
Dame.
is that he's talking. This is where Bradbury likes thinking about stuff. It just sounds like a cliche. Of course, he likes thinking, but he's obviously thinking about the way in which we have different rituals and different eras that take over from each other, but
Yeah.
all are part of the same tradition of dealing with the darkness. He's obviously
Right.
thinks a lot about this, dealing with the darkness inside and outside. And here, Mountroud, in this is basically, Mountroud's ambiguous, but he's also sort of, obviously, he acts like he's on their side. He goes and shows them stuff. He teaches them the lesson about this, is that we've always had rituals of rebirth. The Winter King dies, and then there's a new Winter King, whatever it is, whatever the ritual is. Terry Pratchett, Hogfather, for more on that, if you want to think about it.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big thing, and that's a big theme in lots of his writing is trying to deal with that darkness, and he deals with it in this book via friendship. I would argue, like the darkness is dealt with through not just through the rituals of the pumpkin tree, but also through the friendship, these friends who sacrifice for each other and make life meaningful.
Yeah, I think there's a deeper layer because he doesn't just he takes them on the journey because he wants them to understand what he's going to ask of them.
I think that's probably right. It's ambiguous whether or not they could have rescued Pipkin if they just weren't scared. But then I'm like, that doesn't seem really like what the ending says.
Well, it kind of ignores the fact that because when we find out that at the end that Pipkin's in hospital, and so it's just like, well, would medicine have just done it?
Yeah.
There's always this question of, have you been taken advantage of? What have you actually given up? What have you actually done? Did their friendship win out, or was it a trick? Because Mallinshroud at the very beginning says, what if I give you a trick?
Only trick.
Only trick. And so if you kind of take that specific line and extrapolate it throughout the story, it's possible that Mallinshroud just tricked him.
Indeed. So you're right. But what do they say at the end? Trick or treat? And they say both.
Both.
Like, yeah.
Well, because they got to go on an adventure, so that was the treat.
And maybe them choosing to risk themselves and sacrifice themselves for their best friend is a treat. Like, maybe it's a privilege to have that. Would it be best that they didn't risk themselves or that they did? So, like, there's no. Yeah, you're right. It could be a trick objectively, but subjectively for these kids, it's actually a massive treat that they won't forget. That has made them closer friends. It's not a book, and Bradbury's never big about this. It's not a book for character work. Pipkin is the only character on it. Mountroud, because Tom Skelton is the third character. He's the leader of the boys, and he's kind of just there. But like Pipkin and Clavicle Mountroud are quite strong characters, but there's not really any other characters in the book, I don't think.
Well, it's so quickly paced.
Yeah,
he doesn't really leave time to work on characterization. Really, the only boy who is ever fleshed out is Pipkin, because he gets like 3 pages of description of when he was born, all the soda pops in town fizzed over. Which is lovely. Is described to be, or that might be from the movie, but I remember that kind of being from the book as well.
Yeah. I just they come to Pipkin. Pipkin's not there. Come on, Pipkin, come out and save the night. Why were they waiting, afraid for one small boy? Because Joe Pipkin was the greatest boy who ever lived, the grandest boy who ever fell out of a tree and laughed at the joke, the finest boy who ever raced around the track winning and then seeing his friends a mile back somewhere stumbled and fell, waited for them to catch up and joined breast in breast, breaking the winner's tape.
Yeah.
Like, it's they get to repay him. Whatever the objective reality of Mountroud's deal, they get to repay him, don't they?
Yeah.
He is the greatest.
Really good.
Yeah, It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
It's funny because a couple of years at work when I got the DVD, because I used to watch it when I was a kid. It was literally one of my like 3 Halloween movies that I always had to watch. I brought in the DVD to work and I was like, has anybody seen this? Nobody had. Nobody liked it as much as I did.
Yeah. Yeah, and Andrew was sacked the next day. It's unconnected, you know. You do find that about weird kids stories. I would say kids books. So kids books and kids films are like that though. Unless it's Disney, you say, "Oh yeah, I know Fievel is quite big," but I'm like, Fievel Goes West. I watched that all the time, and I don't think when I was young I knew anyone who had watched anything to do with Fievel. I guess it's
American Tail.
Yeah. American Tail 2. So I didn't watch American Tail 1 and American Tail. I watched American Tail 2, Fievel Goes West. I had that on tape, VHS, watched it a lot. I think it's a genuinely great Western. I'm a massive connoisseur of the Western, and I think it's a great Western. And maybe it's what started my love for the genre with Jimmy Stewart's last film. That was his last film before he retired. But, you know, no one else had heard of it. So they're like,
really?
I've watched this.
I grew up on
it. Well, great. I think it's more popular in America than over here. But it was a weird thing. It's the same principle that you have these childhood films, particularly films and books, that are unique to you and no one has heard of, but they're so definitional because you're like 7 and you're watching this and you think this is the whole world.
Yeah.
And I find that with my kids. They're really into some stuff that none of their friends have heard of just because that's what we watch with them or whatever it is.
Fair enough. Yeah, American Tail is very popular in the US. At least in Indiana where I am. Like I can, as long as somebody's around my age, I can mention American Tail and be like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Indeed. I think it, like I say, it just must be more popular in America. It's obviously a Steven Spielberg thing. The first 2 are Steven Spielberg. So Amblin Entertainment. I liked the Halloween tree a lot. I didn't feel like I came away being like,
it was mind blowing. It's not.
This is mine. Yeah. That's not a criticism. That sounds like I'm like, oh man, it was disappointing. I'm like, yeah, that was quite fun. I think the point is that October Country was, without being the best book ever, really, really good. Halloween Tree was just quite nice. I enjoyed reading it. I felt pleasure reading it. You know, I liked the ending. You know, probably Ray Bradbury and I could have some really interesting debates about his metaphysics and his philosophy and all this stuff about death and life and all that stuff. I thought that was interesting, but like, yeah, it was nice. There wasn't loads to it. It was candy floss on how it was pumpkin.
Candy floss is cotton candy here.
Yeah. But pretty much, it's cotton candy on Halloween. I do think, and book songs did actually just mention it, but I think this is a bigger, different proposition altogether. I don't think it's an all-time great, but I think this was a really interesting. You've got I've got the weird carousel cover, merry-go-round cover,
and I've got the carnival showing up.
Yeah.
As it there we go. I'm going in the wrong direction. As it kind of funnels into the town. My general thoughts on this one is I found the ending or the final resolution of the conflict in this story to be disappointing. Because it just kind of ends. I've never been a fan of the theme of just victory through love. Like, and that's kind of what this one just kind of ends up being. But what I love about it is the themes within the story. And there's the theme of friendship. There's the fear of being left behind, the fear of growing old and starting something new too late in life. There's the fear of settling down. There's the fear of just growing old. It's, if I believe I've already said, but there's so much in this one. And I thought that the Illustrated Man was the same Illustrated Man in the Illustrated Man collection.
It kind of is, but it's the same character behind the story. Like this guy he saw when he was at a carnival when he was young.
Yeah.
But like, it doesn't seem like they are the same, but they obviously they are the same. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's also all those things you mentioned about the carnival that are kind of woven into this.
The fake and the real. Yeah. No, so Cougar and Dark's Pandemonium Shadow Show turns up, and Jim, who's a bit of a rogue, Jim Nightshade, is that his name? And Will Halloway want to go along because obviously they're kids, they want to go. And Will is more cautious, more sensible. It's really important, very important to the story that Will's dad is an older guy. He's had a kid old, but he's at home, and that's part of the dynamic. Whereas Jim doesn't. Jim sort of is pushing the bounds of authority in a different way. You're right. There's a lot of stuff about fear, and there's a lot of stuff about friendship and fatherhood as well.
Yes,
great.
Yeah, because I forget. I get the boys mixed up because their names are both 3 letters.
Yeah.
No, 4. So Will is the one with the father.
Yeah,
correct.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
so
right.
Will's father is, he's older, and so he doesn't know how to quite relate to his son, and so he just kind of goes and hides at the library he works at, works the night shift, and like stays over. He reads his books. He goes on his little mind adventures like we all do. And that's kind of what he does. He can't quite relate to his younger wife, who's full of, life, and she doesn't really understand the struggles of what he's going through. He feels he's entered into this fatherhood adventure too late in life. And he's never really been one to settle down. And now he's, got a family. He's got a job. He's kind of stuck in this small town where he's been a wandering kind of waif, taking jobs on the road and stuff like that. And so it's kind of an unexpected life for him. And he's been in it for a few years because, Will and Tim?
They're like 12, aren't they? Jim,
yeah,
they're like 12 or something. Yeah. No, it's not like he's just had a kid, but he's he's in his early 50s, I think, in the book. Yeah. So if you think he got married and had a kid when he was in his late 30s, early 40s, and now his son is coming of age. A big thing is that Jim and Will are, because they're around 13, they're on the edge of that kind of traditional adolescence, manhood kind of.
They're about to hit the teens. And Jim,
he doesn't get it.
To grow up.
Because he's ready to. I think it's because Jim is at home. He loves his mum, but he's just at home. He doesn't have. He has his one friend, but he doesn't have a life. There's not really any hope. He's not excited about anything other than being older. That's the thing, is nothing is exciting other than being older.
So when the dark carnival kind of rolls through town, and something is mysterious about the dark carnival, because they kind of sneak out late at night, and they see this amorphous, billowing black cloud kind of just funnel down and all of a sudden materialize rather quickly into this foreboding dark carnival. They don't quite know what to think about it. But they're intrigued, and it calls to them, and they catch the attention of its proprietors, who are just this kind of menacing, weird kind of gentlemen.
I know. Who seem to have it's not completely clear. Like, it's a horror fantasy. Like, it's a fantasy with strong horror elements. It's not completely clear what's supernatural and what's not in every respect. But one thing, there seems to be a few things. It certainly seems they've got some sort of life-sapping machine, like a vampiric effect on life that keeps them going. Because it turns out that this carnival has been here many times before. Like,
they just always wait like 30 or 40 years long enough for everybody to forget.
There's also at least one other seemingly supernatural creature. There's a witch, and this witch is some sort of ghost or who knows what she is.
She's like a wayfinding. She can find people.
And she's creepy. She is like Guillermo del Toro kind of horror creepy. She would fit in, with the guy with the eyes on his hands. So she, and basically,
I think it was rather charming.
You'd like that guy. You'd be like, I want to hang out with you. And I think the sense that, like, these two boys who both are on the cusp of change, but don't understand what that change is going to mean. Obviously, they don't, because they're 12 or whatever. And Will's dad, who feels like he's on the cusp of change, and he doesn't get where his kids are. He himself is old. He's going to die. He's not going to die tomorrow, but he feels like death is coming. And then this thing turns up and starts to manipulate people with hopes and disappointments, like old people, lonely people who are desperate and sad. And it begins, and it is basically, it's pretty clear soon that the carnival is deeply evil,
Yeah.
but tempting, because maybe it can promise you things, maybe it can give you things. And books, you mentioned it's about age is a strong theme. I think it appeals to those who are struggling with the aging process, whatever that means, for the individual. And I guess what I really liked, I agree with you. You said the ending wasn't quite there for you because it kind of has a metaphorical ending that's real. Here's a metaphor that's real, and you're like, okay, that's cute. But I think
it's kind of like, I will combat the darkness with hope and love. And like how darkness can't quite hold up against these concepts and these ideas.
Yeah,
and
that's a good theme. But I think what you could say is that I guess Halloween Tree does things similar because it's Mountrad was like, okay, if you're too scared to conquer death, fair enough, that's reasonable. Here's a deal. And there was like a mechanic. It feels like there's a mechanic involved and a sacrifice involved that earns the ending. Whatever it, as you say, it's ambiguous. Whereas I think here it just kind of like, oh, it's just fine. But what I really liked about it, so I'd say that did knock it slightly for me. But what I really liked was that, I liked the characters a lot. I thought Book said this, but the characterization was great. And I think Charles Halloway, the dad, and you're sympathetic too, you're obviously from the experience of being a dad, that he's so resonated, not because I'm 50, but I resonated so much with his kind of him dealing with his own stuff, him fearing for his son. And obviously when he decides to basically go to war against the darkness, that is a very, very fun moment. Like just this, and especially the classic, the kids are on, what happens is the kids are on their own. No, they're not on their own. And it's not a fantastical creature called Clavicle Mountrad who comes to rescue them or help them, but it's just his dad.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I loved that as a theme.
I liked a lot of it because basically we've got the villains' names have since fled my mind.
Cougar and Dark are the two main ones, aren't they?
Yeah, I believe Dark is the one who we interact with the most. Cougar's
He's very
the one
charming. Yeah, Cougar gets screwed.
Yeah, so Cougar got by them boys. They got up to mischief and they got rid of him fairly easily. But Dark has a lot of menace. And I think that's why the ending didn't quite work for me, is there's all this menace with Dark and he seems to have all this power, and then it just kind of goes away. Because of an idea. And that I don't know, from a reader perspective, like it was more metaphor than ending. But
it's a Neil Gaiman ending.
Yeah. when Dark starts working in on Will's dad, and like they've gotten caught in some mischief, and his dad's kind of like, okay, what's going on? And he starts to kind of open up because he doesn't think his dad's gonna believe him, because who's gonna believe these crazy 12-year-old boys who just gotten caught in some mischief? And he's just kind of like, he's kind of skeptical. He's like, just don't do it again. And then he kind of starts to see the bigger picture. He kind of starts to see the substance to it. He kind of starts to understand that his sons aren't fibbing and that there is somebody dangerous. And he starts believing, and then believing is seeing, and then he kind of comes to the rescue. And it's this lovely relationship of like, he just, I don't know, he wasn't too old to save his son. He wasn't, he didn't need to be young like he thought he did.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that it is not the story you expect it's going to be. I think it's a bit, in that sense, specifically, it's like Dudley Stone. It's very different, but Dudley Stone is the thing where you're like, oh, what's here? And you're like, the weird twist is a triple twist, a quadruple twist. You know what I mean? It's just this very different accounting for what's going on. And the same with Something Wicked, that you're like, oh, so the story's going to be these kids have to fight the evil carnival. It's the film big but more horrific, like it's like that. But no, it's not. It's actually that this old guy, who's not that old, but like he feels very old, who normally would be alien from the action and wouldn't be able to help, is in fact the hero. Also, that Will's goodness, like how Will is just a good kid who loves people. It's really, he loves his
friend. He doesn't want his friend to leave him.
Yep. In that sense, actually, your version of Pipkin in the Halloween Tree film is obviously more like Jim.
Yeah.
like mischievous, but his friends love him. Here, Will, because it'd be easy to be like, okay, Jim is bad because of this, but Will is actually a loser because he's not cool. That's a really common thing you find. Like, oh no, everyone's a bit flawed. You're like, no, I like that Will's just a good kid who really wants to help his friend, and he risks himself. The best thing is he's not alone in himself.
So I want to see if you kind of agree with me on this, because one of my favorite scenes in Something Wicked This Way Comes is when Jim has basically been ensnared. He's been ensnared by the Dark Carnival, and he's basically turned to his father to help. And then kind of Will kind of gets snared. And so we see this father who is basically being called out to do a carnival trick or something, and he's trying to save his son, and he's calling to him. And I loved all of the themes and messaging around that scene, and I thought it was very powerful.
Yeah. And obviously because he's facing his own temptations too, because he's old, he's a loser, he's right for that. He can't do his job. He can't be a good husband. He can't be a good father. So he thinks. Obviously, his wife and his son love him. It's not true. We know it's not true, but he feels like that. And we've seen aging people or lonely people tempted and destroyed by the carnival. And so there does feel like there's real risk, I think, actually. You are like, what's going to happen? Is there going to be an exchange here? Is there going to be a deal made, let's say? Because there's a deal offered at one point.
Right.
But yeah, it's a very different conclusion that, obviously, the conclusion isn't actually fully satisfying, but I think that confrontation is very good because you have dark. If you think about it, Halloway, remember, what does Hallows, All Hallows Eve, All Saints, it means holy. Like his name, he is the Holy One versus dark. Like it's very much a good and evil clash. And though
it's a clever naming convention, I didn't catch that.
Yeah. It's though good seems weaker than evil, he's not. And this is where the metaphor does work, by the way. What actually makes him different? Love. The start of the film Serenity, this is a deep cut 18 years ago, the Joss Whedon film Serenity, the Firefly sequel, there's this early moment where the bad guy, who's kind of quite compelling bad guy, Chiwetel Ejiofor, says, what's that look in this guy's face who's rescued his sister? It's love. Like, it's dangerous. Because they're like, why have these good guys managed to break out this girl? You're like, no, because they love each other. And Halloway is kind of similar. I think Charles Halloway is similar. That the difference between him and Dark is he loves people.
Okay.
Whereas Dark just wants to destroy people.
Yeah.
Dark just wants to be eternal, And so in that sense, it's definitely like the Halloween tree. That kind of, I think I'm not sure what ending I prefer though. That's the only thing is, like, I agree with you. It ends weakly on that point, but I'm not sure what I would rather have happened.
I think it's an ending that needs to be thought about, and I think I think Something Wicked This Way Comes is one of those books that will be better on reread, because having talked to you about the ideas and the themes and the fact that Holloway has a secondary meaning and things of that nature, or like a slight hidden, like it's a little tongue in Bradbury.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I think that's something great. And it makes a little bit more sense to me as well, and brings it up to the point where, like, I fully intend to reread these books, because I mean this trilogy of books is like his perfect kind of spooky season just collection, because there are horror elements and just kind of, if not horror, like fallish elements kind of woven all throughout them. Like they are meant to be a part of a spookier theme, and I just absolutely love that. We managed to talk about all three, so
we did in just under an hour and a half.
Just under an hour and a half. I consider that a success. I plan on continuing more Bradbury here in the near future. I've literally got mood reading slots that I just have written Agatha Christie or Ray Bradbury.
I was going to say, I've got my my Agatha Christie. People who watch my channels may have noticed it before, but I do just there's a bunch of Agatha Christie. I have these shelves up here are mostly Agatha Christie.
I've just gotten into Agatha Christie and Ray Bradbury, so I'm very early on. in my adventure. I also read Fahrenheit 451, which is incredibly good as well.
I've got that coming up on my TBR. I'll be reading that this year, which is arguably his most famous book, maybe.
Yeah, very
At
famous.
one point, at least it was. So yeah, I think the other ones that people mention most, this, and Illustrated Man. But yeah, no, I like Ray Bradbury a lot, and I think he's an easy read, and that means he's an easy reread. So I'll definitely be coming back to probably at least the October Country, because there's just these little kind of nuggets.
It was so good.
Yeah,
I went looking for it and I put it right there.
Yeah. Well, no,
it's just an amazing collection. It does start off a little bit on the weaker side, but I mean, Dudley Stone was such an amazing short story, and the influence.
Yeah, you can see the influence. Yeah, I think Dudley Stone would be my you say book says about Gaiman, obviously. So I would say my copy of Something Wicked does have darkly poetic, probably Bradbury's best work, Stephen King. Again, that's where you started when my tech went. Like, he's a massive influence on King too. He's I'd recommend, if you like the ghost stories, try to hunt down online versions, texts of some Russell Kirk ghost stories. The books are quite hard to find. My favorite story, if it wasn't The Wonderful Death of Dudley Stone, my favorite story was probably I don't know. I liked Uncle Einar. I liked The Lake. Those were some of my favorites, and I liked the woman. I liked that story. I thought it was funny.
The old woman. Yeah, there was an old woman. The Wonderful Death of Dudley Stone are definitely two of my favorites. I liked Einar. I liked The Small Assassin quite a bit.
I did too, to be fair. Like, my niggles aside, I was like,
in the Jar.
Great. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of great short stories. That are. I mean, Wikipedia says the entire hardback of October Country is 306 pages, and that's 19 stories. So if you extrapolate it out, there's a
lot of options. A lot of options. Yeah. What was your favorite of all of these then? In terms of, if you could read one story or one of the novels again, what would it be?
Halloween Tree. I've got so much of my identity wrapped up in the Halloween Tree. I mean, it was a formative movie.
Yeah, and I bet it was nice to read the book. I bet it was nice to finally read the book.
It was nice to read the book, because it is a rather faithful adaptation. Because, like you said, Bradbury did the movie as well.
Yeah.
So
I haven't seen the Something Wicked film, but I will definitely hunt down the Halloween Tree. I'll hunt for the Halloween Tree movie.
It's definitely worth. It's really short. It's well, while I've got you here, I might as well look it up.
Yeah.
Halloween Tree film, 1993. Do you give me a runtime? 69 minutes. It's an hour and 9 minutes long. It's not
really
long.
short. Yeah. No.
Written by Ray Bradbury. So
writer and narrator.
He's the narrator as well.
He's the narrator. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I didn't know.
Yeah.
That would make sense. Ray Bradbury's got an amazing voice then. Fantastic voice. But I think we covered all three books. Before we
thanks for having me.
I will once again say that anybody who has watched this, made it this far, watching it back on rewatch, please go and subscribe to Owen's channel. I do have it in the description box down below, and I'm very happy to have finally done a live stream with you.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll do one. It'll be less than 2 years before the next one, probably.
Probably. It will most definitely be. We'll keep it to a year and 11 months.
Exactly.
With that said, we'll go ahead and do the sign off.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Thanks everyone for watching.
See ya.